Tonight, severe hailstorms lash southeast Queensland and whip up a rare water spout. I'm Ellen Fanning, this is ABC News Queensland. Queensland's new cabinet sworn in at Government House with a few surprises. The local council needing to sell off assets to cover a massive deficit. And the American football game making inroads in Australia with lots of enthusiasm. Good evening. A supercell brought hail and fierce storms to much of southeast Queensland this afternoon. A rare water spout was seen on the Brisbane River. Strong winds brought down trees at Kangaroo Point, injuring a young man.
Twisting its way down the river. A weak gustnado or waterspout was seen on the Brisbane River. The Bureau of Meteorology says the rare phenomenon lasted for about half a minute. It left fallen trees and debris in its wake.
The river is over about 2 meters high.
Lee Meng Tong sought shelter from the falling branches in a stranger's car.
You know, I just pushed this for my life. And there are two people call me and save my life.
A 22-year-old man wasn't as lucky. He was hit by a tree branch at the bottom of Kangaroo Point Cliffs and was taken to hospital with minor injuries. Across the southeast, parts of Brisbane, Logan and the Scenic Rim were hit by large hailstones. Some were up to 7 centimetres in size. At the airport, there were short delays as planes were checked for hail damage. A colourful display was left in the storm's wake. The storms have now eased in the southeast, but the Bureau of Meteorology has warned more activity is expected in central parts of the state tomorrow. Toby Loftus, ABC News, Brisbane.
Queensland's Premier David Crisafulli's first full cabinet has been announced and sworn in, the first LNP ministry in the state in almost a decade. The lineup includes former leaders Tim Nicholls as Health Minister and Deb Frecklington as Attorney General, but Mr Crisafulli has been accused of breaking a pre-election promise.
Big smile, everyone.
Happy snaps on the steps of Government House.
No pressure.
Premier David Crisafulli's team gathering for the moment they had long waited for. 6 days after winning the election, one by one his full ministry was sworn in. The final lineup, comprising 6 women and 13 men, 12 of the team are first-time ministers. The other 7 were on the front bench during the Newman government.
I promised Queenslanders a fresh start, and this is the team to deliver it.
He had also promised before election day to carry his shadow cabinet into government.
Absolutely, I've said that many times. The cabinet, the shadow cabinet I'm taking to the election will be the cabinet after the election if we're elected to government.
But there are changes. Former Shadow Education Minister Christian Rowan has not made the ministry. Instead, he'll be the Leader of the House, while his colleague Andrew Powell has been elevated to the Cabinet.
Premier, why should people believe you on your promises when you've already walked back to one on the Cabinet that wouldn't change?
Well, it's the same faces were standing behind me.
Christian Rowan's not here.
Well, he's the Leader of the House.
Ros Bates, the former Shadow Health Minister, has been given the finance and trade portfolios.
Have a new challenge. I have held that government to account for the last 7 years.
Former LNP leader Deb Frecklington, who served as the Shadow Water and Energy Minister, has been sworn in as Attorney General. Tim Nicholls, who was the Shadow Attorney General, is now the Health Minister.
Do you feel like you've been handed a poison chalice?
I think I've been given the cup of opportunity and that cup runs over.
Declaring he has big expectations of his team, Mr Crisafulli will be issuing charter letters to ministers over the next week. That'll outline performance targets they must meet. If they don't, they could be dumped from their roles. Mr Crisafulli wants his ministers to work through the weekend ahead of the team's first cabinet meeting on Monday. Time is ticking on the LNP's plan for its first 100 days in office. Kate McKenna, ABC News, Brisbane.
There is growing anger after Queensland's landmark First Nations truth-telling inquiry was scrapped by the new LNP government in its first week. Inquiry head Joshua Creamer says the Premier has not even paid him the courtesy of telling him in person. And a warning, this story contains images of First Nations people who may have died.
It opened with so much hope, set up by the former government to heal old wounds about colonisation.
We've been crying out for years and years. No one helping us.
And just when they thought politicians were listening, they've been silenced.
A lot of pain, a lot of hurt in relation to this decision today.
This is a gravely disappointing development in Queensland.
Inquiry Chair Joshua Creamer says he hasn't been personally told his inquiry is to be shut down.
The fact that we haven't been informed, I think, is actually quite shocking, quite stark, and I think it goes to the conduct of the government and their approach to the truth-telling issue.
David Crisafulli has made no secret of his opposition to the hearings.
I saw what happened during the referendum. I saw the division, and I don't want to go down the same path for Queensland.
During the campaign, he also pledged to repeal the Path to Treaty Act.
But I didn't use inflammatory language. I didn't seek to divide.
He insists the move is not a lost opportunity.
I've seen the disadvantage, and it hurts. And I'm determined to do something about it.
But Aboriginal elders say trust is broken.
It's shocking because it set our community up to fail.
Well, it's a major setback for First Nations communities, and I just urge the Premier to pause the decision for the moment.
But that is unlikely. Lexi Hamilton-Smith, ABC News.
Australia's Passport Office is under scrutiny after a damning audit revealed more than a dozen officials and contractors are being investigated for possible misconduct. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
The Passport Office produces the document which every single Australian relies on whenever we go overseas. The office came under pressure last year over lengthy delays in processing passports, and now its contracts to produce those passports, worth around $1.5 billion, have come under the auditor's microscope. The audit assessment is brutal. Few of those contracts were opened up to proper competition, and in at least 16 instances, officials failed to declare conflicts of interest. And 18 people, including current officials, former officials and contractors, are now being investigated by the department. That's not all. Auditors also examined 2 work trips which officials took to the Queensland resort town of Port Douglas, which they were scoping out for a major conference at a cost to taxpayers of more than $30,000. After booking a local resort, the officials decided they'd actually hold the conference in Canberra instead, which meant they had to fork out another $104,000 in cancellation fees. The government is unimpressed. It says things have improved at the Passport Office over the last 18 months, but it's still looking into exactly what happened and whether it might need to take further action.
With just 5 days to go before the US presidential election, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have been campaigning in the western battleground states of Nevada and Arizona. The issue of gender was once again front and centre as the candidates attempted to woo undecided and potentially crucial Latino voters. North America correspondent Carrington Clark reports from Las Vegas.
Swinging through the Sunbelt, New Mexico and the key swing states of Nevada and Arizona.
Hispanics love Trump.
Desert districts and prized votes ahead of next week's election.
I believe in the power of Latinos.
The Vice President appearing alongside one of the most famous Puerto Ricans.
It wasn't just Puerto Ricans that were offended that day. Okay? It was every Latino in this country. It was humanity.
Capitalising on the fallout from offensive comments made at a Trump rally earlier this week. Donald Trump also trying to shore up support among Latinos.
Nobody loves our Latino community and our Puerto Rican community more than I do.
The Vice President seizing on fresh comments by Trump about protecting women, whether they like it or not.
He simply does not respect the freedom of women or the intelligence of women.
She's a very caring woman. As I said, she's not going to be a dictator.
We are going to be in deep trouble if Kamala Harris wins.
Both candidates will spend the few remaining days of this campaign moving from swing state to swing state, trying to woo undecided voters and to motivate their supporters to head to the polls. Private jets and fancy events like this, though, don't come cheap. And on that front, one side has a definite advantage. The Republicans have raised about $1.5 billion, while the Democrats have raised more than $2.2 billion.
And some of the Democratic cash has been deployed in the middle of Vegas. But Trump also has some deep-pocketed friends.
Elon, that's a great one. He feels it's so important.
His billionaire backers' campaign tactics have found their way into a Philadelphia courtroom, where a district attorney is trying to stop his $1 million handouts to voters who register with his super PAC.
Elon Musk didn't show. We are going to handle this case and continue to handle this case.
With 5 days to go, there's likely plenty of oscillations left in this race. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Las Vegas.
More than 1,000 rescue workers have been deployed to the worst-hit areas of Spain after catastrophic floods that killed around 160 people. The Prime Minister is warning residents the danger of further flooding hasn't passed.
Residents trudge through debris, searching for belongings and any sign of their loved ones. The task is monumental. Rescuers believe there are still bodies trapped in these cars, unable to get out before the deluge came through.
The firefighters took the elderly first, when they could get in. I'm from nearby, so I tried to help and rescue people. People were crying all over. They were trapped.
The mammoth floodwaters tore down bridges and tossed cars across highways and crucial rail lines. Train services aren't expected to resume for weeks. A daunting cleanup is underway, but getting in desperately needed supplies and help isn't easy. Many areas are only accessible from the air. Frustration and desperation is growing.
We are not thieves, but we have to eat. What can I give to the child if we don't have electricity?
No one in this area can contact each other because we have no internet. There's about more than 150,000 people that have just been displaced.
Locals and those who have made it to the disaster zone are doing what they can, but with everything coated in a thick layer of mud, even walking is difficult. Spain's Prime Minister has warned the dangerous weather may not be finished. More heavy rain is expected in some of the worst-hit areas.
Do not go out, stay at home, because right now the most important thing is to safeguard as many lives as possible.
Farmers among those hurting. This disaster will have enduring consequences for the region, which is a global exporter of oranges. But for now, the focus is on finding those still missing as floodwaters recede. Michelle Rimmer, ABC News.
6 Australian women have accused the former Harrods boss of sexual assault in what's been described as the worst case of corporate sexual abuse the world has ever seen. Lawyers have now launched officially legal action against the famous London department store after more than 400 people came forward with harrowing allegations.
These are some of the hundreds of women who say they were sexually abused by Mohammed Al-Fayed.
In many ways, it's the worst case of corporate sexual abuse of women that the world has ever known.
Among the 420 people who've come forward, Australians who landed jobs at Harrods in their 20s.
Because when they were youngsters, they travelled and they came to London and they got a job at Harrods, and it was the most wonderful thing that they've ever had. A lot of them, after they'd been, subjected to this horrific ordeal, fled.
The shocking allegations stretch into sport. Footballers at the Fulham club Al Fayed owned for 16 years say they were sexually harassed by the billionaire.
I know that by speaking out, we're making it harder for this kind of behaviour to be tolerated anywhere.
Al Fayed, who died last year at the age of 94, owned Harrods between 1985 and 2010. Legal proceedings have now been officially launched against the department store. Lawyers told the ABC they're investigating abuse claims against children as young as 11.
He's a vile monster. Is there any other way to describe him?
While Mohammed Al Fayed will never face justice himself, lawyers for the survivors say this legal action isn't about revenge, but accountability.
It means setting a precedent so that in the future, young girls don't go through the same thing.
Harrods' new owners are in the process of setting up a compensation scheme for survivors. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, London.
Back home, and one of Queensland's councils is selling off prime real estate as it struggles to bring its finances under control. Bundaberg Regional Council has earmarked 26 properties from community halls to beachside blocks at Bargara. The former Burnett Shire Council building is also up for sale. The Mayor says the council is trying to claw back a $16 million operating deficit.
As an organisation, we're certainly looking at every way that we can try to either raise revenue, lower operational costs or staff costs. So we are looking at all different avenues of what we can do, and this is just one of those.
A judge has ruled One Nation leader Pauline Hansen breached racial discrimination laws in a tweet to fellow Senator Marine Faruqi. She used a variation of a racist slogan telling the Deputy Greens leader to go back to Pakistan. Senator Faruqi says the case took a large personal toll but has delivered vindication.
It was a case with complex issues, but Marine Faruqi says the outcome sends a simple message.
And it sends a strong message to racists that they will be held accountable.
On the day of the Queen's death in 2022, Senator Faruqi said she couldn't mourn the leader of a racist empire. Senator Hansen's reply said, in part, "It's clear you're not happy, so pack your bags and piss off back to Pakistan." The One Nation leader argued that was exempt from racial discrimination law because it was a fair comment on a matter of public interest. The federal court disagreed.
Her tweet was an angry personal attack on Senator Faruqi, with no discernible content or comment about the issues raised by Senator Faruqi's tweet.
The court found that while Muslims as a group may not be protected under the Act, the senator's identity as a person of colour, an immigrant and a Muslim were inseparable.
Today is a win of every single person who has been told to go back to where they came from.
The expert evidence establishes that that is a racist trope with a long history.
The judge has ordered Pauline Hansen to delete the tweet and pay Senator Faruqi's costs, which are likely to run into the hundreds of thousands. But as for an apology, Senator Faruqi says she's not expecting anything. She wasn't in court to hear the decision, but Senator Hansen was back on Twitter expressing deep disappointment. The outcome demonstrates the inappropriately broad application of Section 18C, particularly insofar as it impinges upon freedom of political expression. The One Nation leader has already flagged an appeal. Jamie McKinnell, ABC News, Sydney.
Probably the biggest surprise of last week's state election was the collapse of the Greens. The party looks set to retain just one seat, Maywa, in Brisbane's inner west. Despite launching the biggest door-knocking campaign in any state or territory election, the party also failed to pick up any of the 4 seats it targeted in inner Brisbane. State political reporter Rachel Stewart spoke with Federal's Green MP Max Chandler-Mather about the lessons the party can take into next year's federal poll.
Max Chandler-Mather, thank you for your time. What went wrong in Queensland?
Well, first thing to say is our vote's up a little bit statewide. It's also up in a few of our target areas, but you're right, it fell short in a bunch of areas, and it's an open question about whether or not we hold on to South Brisbane. Look, I think part of it is that obviously Labor adopted a lot of the policies that we were campaigning on, including 50-cent fares. I think that's a good thing, though, to be honest, because 50-cent fares on public transport improves people's lives. But the honest answer is we don't have all the answers yet. So of course we're going to have a long, honest look at our politics and our strategy and make sure we're doing everything right. And a key part of that will be getting honest feedback from the communities that we represent and we want to represent.
So far, what do you think are some of the lessons that you've learnt?
To be frank, I think it's difficult to exactly say what happened because we're less than a week out from that election, and we want to be really careful about making sure we learn the right lessons. And a key way of learning the right lessons is making sure we talk to as many people in Queensland and the electorates that we represent. Go back to our free community dinners that we're running, our free school breakfasts, our regular community barbecues, our door knocking, and the first question we'll be asking, is there anything you'd like us to be doing differently? Is there anything you think we should be doing differently going into the federal election? What's your feedback? Why didn't you vote Greens this time when previously you had?
How much responsibility do you take for your role in this result?
Oh, look, I think that it's a big party here in Queensland. Obviously, I'm a public figure in that, and if there's anything I could do differently, of course, I'd be open to that feedback. Again, I think humility in politics is an important thing. And look, if there's things I can be doing differently and members of the community think so, of course, I have to be open for that.
There's been some criticism of your position on the Middle East, blocking housing reform, appearing at the CFMEU rally. How much of an impact do you think those actions had here in Queensland?
Well, look, just quickly first on housing, I think it's important to note that we actually passed Labor's housing fund last year in return for securing $3 billion of social housing funding, 6 times more than Labor wanted. And this year, we still haven't voted on Labor's help to buy legislation. That vote comes on November 26. And I do think people want politicians to work together to find solutions to these crises, and that's what we're trying to do. We don't expect to get everything, but we would like, it's just like last year, a little bit of a marginal improvement. Look, with regards to the Middle East and Palestine, one of the key pillars of our party is peace. And certainly we are unabashed in our push to make sure that we end the massacre and serious war crimes that are being committed in Gaza at the moment. We think that's crucial, and Australia has a responsibility to play a part in that. And look, with regards to the CFMEU, we have a principle that we wanted to stand up for, and what we spoke out about was protecting the rule of law and natural justice, and we felt like the legislation that Labor was passing really offended that and put that at threat, and so that principle for us is really important.
What do you say to comments that the Greens have drifted away from its core environmental policies in favour of a more radical agenda?
Well, with regards to our environmental policies, that's still front and centre. Climate change and the impact that it's going to have on the Australian environment is critical. Remember, in the lead up to the last federal election, the devastating Brisbane floods. We don't know what this summer is going to look like, but I'm worried. And that's partly as a result of both sides of politics' failure to take climate change seriously. Emissions are higher now under this Labor government than they were under Scott Morrison. And that's a really critical, serious concern and core to what our party believes in.
For the upcoming federal election, will your strategy change? Will you now have to defend seats and not look at gaining any?
Well, we always were going to play a big part in and a big focus in making sure we hold on to our 3 new federal seats in Queensland. We can't take anything for granted. We do have a good chance in Moreton as well with a retiring Labor MP, and also the state results there saw swings to us in every state seat under Moreton.
Are you worried about your re-election prospects?
Oh, look, I'm a first-term MP. I can't take anything for granted. And we've got to make sure we work as hard as we possibly can.
Max Chandler-Mather, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
To the Middle East, and authorities say 6 doctors have been killed in Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. Evacuation orders have been issued in the east of Lebanon for a 2nd day in a row, and strikes have been reported in the coastal city of Tyre. On the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Red Crescent released this video after 4 people were killed trying to access food aid. Taiwan has been hit by its strongest typhoon in almost 30 years, killing at least 2 people. Typhoon Kong-Ray made landfall on Tuesday afternoon and is now lashing the Chinese coast. East Asia correspondent Kathleen Calderwood has more.
Gusts of around 230 kilometres an hour were recorded as Typhoon Kongray made landfall on Taiwan's southeastern coast, the equivalent of around a Category 4 cyclone. More than 500,000 homes lost power and hundreds of flights and ferries were cancelled. For the flights that did go ahead, it was touch and go in the strong winds. Thankfully, this passenger plane did eventually land safely. Some areas received around 1.2 metres worth of rain, causing flooding and several landslides and rockfalls, and massive trees have been felled across the island. 2 Czech tourists reported missing in the Taroko National Park have been found and rescued safely. After the entire island shut down as the typhoon approached, most businesses and schools reopened again today with a monumental clean-up effort ahead.
Property prices are still going up, with Brisbane the second most expensive city in the country, but the pace is starting to slow. Buyers are being held back by how much they can borrow. At the same time, more homes are being listed for sale.
Selling season is heating up in the nation's second most expensive city.
It's lovely to meet you.
No worries. Thanks for the time.
My pleasure.
This real estate agent in Brisbane just sold a 2-bedroom unit $60,000 above the reserve. She's now gearing up to auction another in the same complex.
This is our second open home, and so far we've had 16 groups through, and I've got lots of interested parties.
More properties are also being put up for sale.
We're seeing a bit of movement from sellers who have been investors or long-time holders, taking advantage of really great prices at the moment.
Prices continued to pick up nationally, up 0.3% in October and 6% for the year. It marked the 21st straight month of gains, but the market is cooling, with price rises easing in Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. Values in Sydney fell for the first time since January 2023, and prices also went backwards in Melbourne, Canberra and Darwin.
This combination of high interest rates, existing poor affordability, and of course increasing numbers of people seeing mortgage stress, that's what's weighing on the property markets.
With property prices remaining high, there's little relief on the way for first home buyers. Even though inflation is still falling, economists say it isn't enough to convince the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates at its meeting next week.
We could see, after a few rate cuts, however, more buyers be confident about entering the market and housing values rising with more momentum.
A slowdown that's likely to be short-lived. Kate Ainsworth, ABC News.
To finance now, the share market has ended its week with heavy losses. Here's David Chow.
Well, the dream of home ownership for a lot of people is looking increasingly like just a dream, especially when you look at how much prices have risen in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth since COVID first struck. Meanwhile, Melbourne has gone from being the second most expensive city to the third cheapest. As for who's borrowing the most, it's the owner-occupiers that are upgrading to a new home. And despite the rumours, there's no sign of investors fleeing the market, considering the value of new home loans for this group of multiple property owners has jumped nearly 30% in a single year. First home buyers, though, aren't getting much of a break. As for whether boomers or younger generations had it tougher, this chart comparing the gap between median house prices and one's capacity to pay should settle the matter. Meanwhile, investors are a bit on edge with just a few days until the US election. The All Ords fell by 0.5% today, which contributed to this week's fairly steep loss of around 1%, though it did do better than most other share markets except for Hong Kong and Shanghai. Now back home, Macquarie was one of today's worst performing stocks after investors decided its $1.6 billion profit wasn't high enough. While oil prices jumped, gold and iron ore fell, and the Aussie dollar slipped to 65.7 US cents. And finally, a court in Russia has issued a record fine to Google for blocking pro-Russian channels on YouTube. It's after 20 decillion US dollars from the tech giant. And that works out to be 20 billion trillion bucks, which is more money than there is in the entire world. And that's finance.
To the NRL, and the Bulldogs have sacked star winger Josh Addo-Carr over a failed roadside drug test. The 29-year-old returned a positive reading after being pulled over by police in September. A second sample produced the same result, prompting Canterbury to sideline him for the NRL finals. Addo-Carr has maintained he had not knowingly ingested cocaine, but the Bulldogs board chose to terminate his contract with 1 year remaining, citing his lack of transparency about the incident. It comes as the transfer market opens up this month, with clubs free to negotiate for off-contract players. Melbourne footballer Joel Smith has been banned for 4 years following a doping investigation. The 28-year-old tested positive to cocaine after a game in 2023. Sport Integrity Australia later found he used text messages to offer cocaine to teammates. That is considered trafficking or attempted trafficking under the AFL's anti-doping policy. Melbourne football boss Alan Richardson said the club respected the decision and will continue to educate the players about their responsibilities. America's national sport is catching on down under, with the NFL determined to ensure flag football isn't cut from Brisbane's 2023 Olympic program. It'll feature in LA for the first time in just 4 years, after already capturing the Australian sporting market at the grassroots level.
It's a sport known for big plays, big personalities and big celebrations. And now the NFL's introductory game, flag football, is having a big impact on the next generation of sporting stars.
It went from 10 schools to 84 schools in 10 months, and we're now at just under 300 schools across the country. And we expect that to grow pretty quickly.
In a tough sporting market, flag football has been a huge success for both young boys and girls after launching in the curriculum in 2022.
Who likes Taylor Swift and the Chiefs?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
It's football, so it ain't too much difference. Just considering, y'all play, I think it's rugby or AFL.
The sport will be played in LA in 2028, but the NFL doesn't want it to be a flash in the pan.
We actually have a very big vision at the moment to ensure that it does get into Brisbane. We want these kids to have a chance to play potentially for their country.
The best of each state gathered on the Gold Coast. This group of talented Victorians will now get a chance to see the bright lights of the United States, crowned national champions. They'll represent Australia at the International Championships at February's Pro Bowl games in Orlando, Florida.
Amazing. Every week these past 3 months has been hard work, and our whole team deserves it.
What are you going to tell them about Australia and how we play sport over here?
We show no mercy.
Jessica Stewart, ABC News, Gold Coast.
Weather now with Jacqui McLaren. And Jacqui, what an active afternoon.
Ellen, gustnadoes, giant hail, what a way to kick off the month of November. Good evening, Queensland. Well, we saw the action kick off from about 2 p.m. with a very dangerous thunderstorm detected near Boona in the scenic rim. The supercell continued to track northeast throughout the afternoon, bringing large hail to giant hail and damaging winds with it across the southeast. And with all of this activity, our inbox was flooded with incredible weather photos. Michael was taking in the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, Dave was catching those hailstones in Oxley, and David was even lucky enough to see a rainbow. Thanks, everyone. Well, let's check temperatures now, and it was Urundangi which took out the hotspot title at 41. Chilly overnight in Applethorpe at just 10, the minimum there, and the capital hit its peak at 30 degrees. Onto the satellite, and plenty of cloud building up around the tropics and plenty of cloud associated with that storm activity. But what was the trigger here? Well, we've got this horseshoe trough, which has been drifting east throughout the day. We've got a trough moving up the coast, and we've got plenty of hot, unstable air feeding in. So all of these ingredients combined, and you've got the perfect recipe for this quite severe storm activity. As for the next few days, we'll see the action ease off from tomorrow in the southeast, with the focus now on central parts from Emerald down to about Kingaroy. Severe cells are possible. And we are in the month of November, so that does mean it's the official start of our cyclone season. Now, we can see here that we have seen a decline in cyclone numbers during recent decades, but it is important to note that we do have warmer than normal ocean temperatures, so this could lead to the most active season we have seen in years. But look, It is the weekend, so let's get into our forecast. In the north, storms are possible in the northwest, and for you, Emerald, you're heading for a top of 36 degrees. Central parts, and it's plenty of sunshine about, but we could see a severe storm south of about Monto, heading for a top of 32. In the southeast, we could see a storm north of the Sunshine Coast. Again, severe cells are possible. Gympie, you're heading for 27, Sunshine Coast 26 for you. In the capital, we'll see the storm activity ease off, and it is a top of 27. Redcliffe heading for a top of 26. Surfers, the swell will kick up a notch tomorrow, so head out early for a paddle if you can, and the north-facing breaks will be your best option. Boaties, winds reaching up to 20 knots, seas around 1 metre. Sunrise will be at 4:55 in the morning, and the sun will set at 6:08 in the evening. And looking ahead, well, conditions will ease over the weekend, warmer days during the working week, and Ellen, I'd suggest keeping the brolly handy this time next week as well.
Yeah, it's really warming up, isn't it? Thanks, Jacqui. That is news to this moment. Thank you so much for your company from all of us here in Brisbane. Good night to you.